I met my husband, David, completely by chance in a coffee shop 12 years ago. I was engrossed in my book when he accidentally bumped into my table, spilling a bit of my coffee. He apologized profusely, flashing a shy but warm smile that struck me immediately. There was something about his easy charm, the softness in his gaze, and the way he handled the little accident that piqued my curiosity. After that small mishap, we ended up talking for nearly 2 hours. That brief conversation was enough to spark a connection, and soon enough, David and I were going on regular dates. There was an undeniable warmth to him, a kindness that was magnetic. With each date, I found myself more drawn to his honesty, his humor, and the gentle way he approached life. Yet, even as things seemed perfect, there was something about David that felt guarded, something unspoken that lingered just below the surface. It was during one of our early dates, maybe the fifth or sixth, that he decided to reveal what he had been keeping from me. As we sat under the dim lights of a small Italian restaurant, he took a deep breath and said, "I need to tell you something." His expression was uncharacteristically serious, his hands clasped nervously. My mind raced, wondering if he was about to confess a secret that would change everything. And then he said it. He had a daughter. Her name was Carrie, and she was 6 years old. Her mother had left when she was just a toddler, leaving David to raise her alone. He explained that being a single father was difficult and that he'd struggled with loneliness, wondering if anyone would ever accept him and his daughter. His voice softened as he spoke about her, and I could feel the deep love and pride he held for his child. But I also sensed his fear, a fear that revealing this part of his life might be a deal breaker. I won't lie, I was taken aback. Up until that moment, I had never considered what it might be like to step into the role of a mother, let alone a stepmother. My life had always been independent, my relationships uncomplicated. I wasn't sure if I was ready to navigate a path so deeply intertwined with the life of a child. But as David continued, sharing stories about Carrie's resilience, her bright personality, and her curious nature, I felt an unexpected warmth. It wasn't easy, of course. The idea of becoming a part of his family weighed on me, and I struggled with the potential responsibility. Yet, I found myself wanting to know more, to meet this girl who had been so bravely navigating life alongside her father. David's honesty and vulnerability touched me, and I realized that my initial hesitation stemmed more from fear than from any genuine lack of interest in his life. A few weeks later, David introduced me to Carrie. I'll never forget that first meeting. She was a small, sweet-natured girl with an inquisitive look in her eyes and a quiet curiosity. She watched me closely, sizing me up in that innocent way children do. At first, I was nervous, unsure of how she would react to me, or if we'd even connect. I hadn't spent much time around kids, and I was afraid I might do or say something wrong. But Carrie surprised me. She was incredibly open, curious about my life, and eager to get to know me. There was a gentle warmth in her that reminded me of David, and I found myself drawn to her in ways I hadn't expected. As weeks turned into months, my bond with Carrie grew. It was gradual, like a bud slowly blooming into a flower. She became a fixture in my life, our lives weaving together naturally as David and I grew closer. I began to look forward to our family dates, trips to the park, dinners at home, movie nights where Carrie would fall asleep halfway through, her small head resting on my shoulder. Eventually, when David proposed, saying yes felt like the most natural thing in the world. I was marrying not only him, but also accepting a beautiful, albeit unconventional, family. The wedding was small, but our families came together to celebrate our union. However, David's mother, Sheila, held reservations about me. She was polite, yes, but there was an undeniable distance, a wariness in her eyes. I brushed it off, thinking she would warm up to me with time. David and I were happy, and Carrie was thriving, which was all that mattered to me. The first few years were blissful. I loved watching Carrie grow, guiding her through school, listening to her dreams and fears. David and I made an agreement early on that I would support Carrie as if she were my own. I began contributing to her education and her extracurriculars, not because I felt obligated, but because she had become like a daughter to me. Every family vacation, every holiday, every milestone, Carrie was there, and with each passing year, she felt more and more like my own child. Our family life continued smoothly until, about 2 years ago, David faced a major setback. His company went through a massive layoff, and he found himself without a job. It was a tough blow, and at first he threw himself into job hunting. He sent out applications, went on interviews, and was optimistic that he'd find a new position soon. But with each rejection, his confidence started to wane, and I could see the toll it was taking on him. He began spending more and more time in the basement, his man cave, which had always been his retreat but now seemed more like an escape. At first, I tried to be supportive, reassuring him that we were in this together. I told him that he didn't need to worry about the finances. I would take care of it all. I picked up extra shifts and worked longer hours to ensure that everything ran smoothly at home. I didn't want him to feel pressured, and I believed that my support would help him get back on his feet. However, as time went by, David seemed to withdraw further. He spent hours in the basement, often gaming late into the night, and during the day, he was distant and irritable. Our conversations became strained, as if there was a wall between us that I couldn't seem to break through. He stopped engaging with Carrie, who had always been his pride and joy, and I found myself stepping in more and more, trying to keep things normal for her. Carrie was old enough to notice the change in her father, and I could tell she was hurt. She'd ask me why he didn't come to her school events anymore or why he spent so much time alone. I didn't have the heart to tell her that I didn't fully understand it myself. I encouraged her to be patient, to give her father some time. Inside, I was starting to worry that things might never return to the way they were. One evening, as I was getting Carrie ready for bed, she looked at me with wide, questioning eyes. "Do you think Dad still loves us?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The question caught me off guard, and I felt a pang in my chest. I reassured her that, of course, he loved us both very much, but inside, I wondered if he was drifting further away from us. It was a heartbreaking realization that my once happy family was slowly unraveling, and I wasn't sure how to hold it together. I tried to talk to David about my concerns, expressing how much I missed the way things used to be, but he brushed it off. He'd make vague promises to change or say that I was nagging him. I was trying to keep our family afloat, and it felt like he was slipping further and further away, consumed by his own struggles. Then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, my world came crashing down in a way I hadn't anticipated. It all began on an otherwise ordinary day when Carrie had a dentist appointment. I had always been the one to take her to her appointments, but that day, I was utterly exhausted. Between balancing work, household chores, and taking care of both Carrie and David, I felt like I was running on empty. I asked David to take her, hoping it would help him reconnect with her a little. To my surprise, David resisted, grumbling and complaining about how inconvenient it was for him. I insisted, standing my ground for once, and after a lot of back and forth, he finally agreed. He muttered under his breath, calling me a nagger for constantly asking things of him, a comment that stung more than I expected. But I let it go, convincing myself that he was just stressed. After they left, I decided to use the rare quiet time to clean the basement. It had been ages since anyone had tidied up down there, and I figured it was overdue. David had always been territorial about his space, insisting he'd get around to cleaning it one of these days. But that day had yet to come. Armed with a duster and garbage bags, I descended the stairs, mentally bracing myself for the mess I'd find. As I started to clean, a phone buzzed nearby. David had left his phone on a stack of boxes, and I picked it up, intending to set it aside. But then it buzzed again, 2 texts from a contact labeled only as Mandy. The messages weren't just friendly, they were deeply intimate. My heart stopped as I read them, my mind racing to process what was unfolding. They painted a painful picture of a relationship that had clearly been ongoing. Mandy asked if David could send her money for a nail appointment, calling him babe and adding a winking emoji. My stomach churned as I pieced together the reality I had unknowingly stepped into. My husband, the man I had supported and stood by, was having an affair. And he wasn't just emotionally involved with another woman. He was using our family's money to fund her lifestyle. The basement felt like it was closing in on me as I stood there, clutching his phone, my mind spiraling with a mix of rage, betrayal, and despair. How long had this been going on? How could I have been so blind? I tried to steady myself, but my emotions got the best of me. I fought back tears as I placed the phone down and continued cleaning, every movement mechanical as my mind raced. I heard the door open and footsteps on the stairs, and suddenly, David was there, looking surprised to see me. "What are you doing down here?" he asked, a flicker of suspicion in his eyes. Forcing myself to stay calm, I shrugged and said, "Just cleaning up a bit." I knew I had to keep it together, at least for now. David mumbled something about grabbing his phone and rushed back upstairs. The moment he was gone, I crumbled, sobbing quietly as the weight of his betrayal sank in. I had given so much of myself to this marriage, to this family, and he had repaid me with lies and deceit. That night, after Carrie was in bed, I confronted him. I couldn't keep the hurt and anger bottled up any longer. I showed him the messages, the proof of his affair, and demanded an explanation. At first, he tried to deny it, claiming I was misinterpreting things, but when I pressed further, he finally admitted to it. He blamed his behavior on his insecurities, saying he felt emasculated by his job loss and that the affair had been a way for him to cope. "You're seriously going to blame me for this?" I asked, incredulous. "I've been the one holding this family together, supporting you financially and emotionally, and this is how you repay me?" David had no response, only weak apologies that felt hollow and insincere. In that moment, I knew that my marriage was over. The man I had loved and trusted was gone, replaced by someone who didn't care about the pain he was causing. I told him I wanted a divorce, that I was done being the one carrying the weight of a marriage he had chosen to destroy. The following days were a blur as I began making arrangements to separate our lives. I reached out to a lawyer, gathering the evidence I needed to protect myself and my future. But in the midst of the turmoil, one thought weighed heavily on me: Carrie. She had become like my own daughter, and I knew this decision would affect her deeply. I wanted to be there for her, to offer her stability, but I also knew that my leaving would create a rift between us. One evening, I sat down with Carrie, gently breaking the news of the divorce. She was devastated, but she didn't cry or protest. Instead, she asked, "Will you still be in my life?" Her question cut me to the core. I reassured her that I would always be there for her, no matter what happened between her father and me. Yet, despite my promises, a few weeks later, Carrie made her stance clear. "I'm choosing to support Dad," she said quietly but firmly. "He's my real family." Her words were like a slap in the face. After all the sacrifices I had made, the love and support I had given her, she was siding with the man who had betrayed us both. It was an impossible blow, and as much as I wanted to stay connected to her, I realized that she had made her choice. I made one final decision before I left. I would no longer pay for her college tuition. I had been the one funding her education, but if she truly saw me as an outsider, as someone unworthy of her loyalty, then I saw no reason to continue providing for her. David's mother, Sheila, called me soon after, outraged by my decision. "Carrie is innocent in all of this," she snapped, accusing me of cruelty for cutting off her tuition. I explained that it wasn't out of spite, but rather a consequence of Carrie's decision to reject me as her family. Sheila refused to see my side, calling me selfish and vindictive. The divorce finalized several months later, and I moved forward with my life. Occasionally, I'd wonder if I'd hear from Carrie, but the silence continued. In the end, I had lost not only a marriage, but also a relationship with a girl I had come to see as my own daughter. It was a painful chapter, but I knew I had done what was right for me. As I settled into my new life, there was an unexpected calm that washed over me, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Living alone again after years of marriage was bittersweet, but the solitude allowed me time to reflect on everything I had endured and to reclaim the parts of myself I had lost along the way. I was working hard, thriving in my career, and slowly, day by day, I found a renewed sense of purpose and strength. David, meanwhile, had made several feeble attempts to reconcile. He would occasionally send messages apologizing, promising to change, or asking for a second chance. But the truth was, the damage had been done. Each time I received one of his messages, it felt more desperate than sincere, as though he was grasping at anything to regain control over a life he had taken for granted. I ignored them, blocking his number eventually, knowing that moving forward required me to cut him out entirely. Then there was Carrie. I would be lying if I said I didn't miss her deeply. It was painful to think about her, this young woman I had nurtured and loved as my own, now distant and firmly aligned with David. A part of me held out hope that, in time, she would reach out, perhaps come to understand the complexity of what had happened. But as the months passed, the silence between us grew louder. I began to accept that maybe she had made her choice, just as I had made mine. David's mother, Sheila, on the other hand, didn't let up. She would call or text sporadically, each message laced with insults and veiled attempts to guilt me into reconsidering my financial support for Carrie's college education. She was relentless, claiming that no real mother would ever abandon a child over a man's indiscretion, that I was cold-hearted and selfish. Sheila never once acknowledged the pain David had inflicted or the sacrifices I had made over the years. To her, I was simply the woman who was punishing her granddaughter. At first, I was furious, her words gnawing at me, bringing back doubts I thought I had left behind. But eventually, I learned to let go of Sheila's opinions. Her insults became little more than background noise, a constant reminder of why I had to draw boundaries in the first place. I was finally prioritizing my well-being, and as difficult as it was, I refused to let guilt pull me back into a life of compromise and sacrifice for people who had only shown me indifference and betrayal. 8 months after the divorce was finalized, I decided to take a small vacation. I needed a break, something to mark the beginning of this new chapter in my life. I booked a week at a cozy, quiet beach town. The days were filled with long walks on the shore, reading novels, and finally allowing myself the peace and joy I hadn't realized I was missing. It was there, sitting by the ocean, that I felt the weight of the past year lift from my shoulders. On my last day at the beach, I received a message from an unknown number. It was a simple, hesitant message. "Hi, it's Carrie. I don't know if you want to talk to me, but I wanted to reach out." Seeing her name on the screen brought a flood of emotions. I was both excited and wary. After all, Carrie had made it clear months ago that she considered David her real family. But curiosity got the best of me, and after a few moments, I responded with a tentative, "Hi, Carrie. It's good to hear from you." Carrie replied almost immediately, as if she had been waiting anxiously. She started by saying that she had been thinking a lot about everything that had happened. "It's been hard," she wrote. "I know I chose Dad, but it hasn't been easy. I don't want to lose you, but I felt like I had to stand by him, you know? He's my dad." I took a deep breath, understanding the turmoil she must have been feeling. "I get it, Carrie," I typed back. "I know you love your dad. You don't have to choose sides for us to have a relationship. I'm here if you need me, always." She was silent for a moment before responding. "Thank you. I want you to know that I appreciate everything you did for me over the years. I'm sorry if I made you feel like I didn't care. I was just, I don't know, confused." Her words brought a sense of closure that I hadn't expected. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear them until that moment. I told her that I understood, that I had always seen her as my daughter, and that I only wished her happiness, whatever path she chose. Carrie didn't respond right away, but I knew the conversation had opened a door between us, one that might take time, but would, hopefully, lead to healing. In the months that followed, Carrie and I continued to exchange occasional messages. Our relationship was far from what it used to be, but there was a warmth in her words that made me hopeful. She was navigating her own path, still tethered to David, but recognizing, perhaps, that she didn't have to lose me entirely. I knew it would take time, and I was willing to give her all the time she needed. Meanwhile, I moved forward, fully embracing the independence I had fought so hard to reclaim. I threw myself into work, took up hobbies I had long neglected, and began to rediscover the parts of myself that had been overshadowed in my marriage. I was no longer the woman who sacrificed everything for others. I was learning to be a woman who valued her own happiness and peace. David occasionally tried to reach out, attempting to rekindle our friendship or seek my advice, especially when he faced challenges with Carrie. I kept my distance, choosing not to be pulled back into the emotional whirlpool I had left behind. I was resolute, focusing instead on the life I was building for myself, a life free from his deceit and dependence. Looking back on it all, I saw that leaving David wasn't just about escaping a failed marriage. It was about finding the courage to stand up for myself, to set boundaries, and to demand respect. And while the scars of the past remained, they served as a reminder of my strength and resilience. I knew that no matter what came next, I was ready to face it with a clear heart and an unshakable sense of self-worth. In the end, I had lost a marriage, but I had gained something far more valuable: freedom, self-respect, and the power to write my own story. And as I continued on my journey, I knew that whatever the future held, I was finally, truly at peace.